What if the soulful strategist you've been calling INFJ is actually an INTP in a poet's hoodie? Or what if your detached logician is really an INFJ 5w4 who learned to mask feelings in the language of ideas? Mistypes between INFJ 5w4 and INTP are everywhere because both can look introspective, cerebral, private, and a little otherworldly. They both write journals, disappear for days to recharge, and talk like they've been living inside a philosophy book. But beneath the aesthetic and the overlap, their engines are not the same. Tonight, we're unmasking the mistype, INFJ 5w4 versus INTP, so you can finally name the pattern you've been living. Let's start with the most important distinction: orientation of certainty. INFJ 5w4s often know first and explain second. Their certainty feels like a quiet bell ringing in the fog. NE forms a convergent image, and FE scans for human implications. INTPs, on the other hand, doubt first and refine towards certainty later. Their certainty is earned by dismantling assumptions. T peels the onion, NE tests new angles, and only after sufficient tinkering will they claim, "This holds," provisionally. If you catch yourself landing on a synthesis and then searching for language to shepherd others into it, you're likely in INFJ 5w4 territory. If you catch yourself happily living in the workshop of hypotheses, not anxious to land the plane, you're probably swimming in INTP waters. That inner motion shows up in how each one talks. INFJ 5w4 speech feels like narrative gravity. They pull disparate things into story form: symbols, people, timelines, outcomes. There's a melodic arc, even if the topic is abstract. You hear, "This means," which points to, and the cost to people would be. INTP speech feels like modular scaffolding. They set definitions, add exceptions, and then travel edge cases with NE-fueled curiosity. You hear, "Define terms, if then, unless, however, consider a variant, same vocabulary, different choreography." Enneagram 5w4 adds spice to both, but in distinct flavors. The 5 core brings conservation of energy, a hunger for understanding, and a private laboratory where competence is king. The 4 wing adds moody color, a search for authenticity, and a taste for the unique. So the INFJ 5w4 becomes the mythsmith, a meaning-driven pattern finder who guards their battery with scholar-like discipline, then crafts quietly intense insights with a signature voice. The INTP with a 5-ish, 4-ish vibe becomes the aesthetic engineer, an idea hacker who builds elegant frameworks and cares about originality but doesn't feel compelled to shepherd people into transformation. One leans toward moral narrative, the other toward elegant neutrality. Here's a visceral test. Imagine someone misrepresents a friend publicly. The INFJ 5w4 will feel heat behind the eyes. They'll examine the pattern, consider the likely fallout on human trust, and feel a responsibility to repair the social moral fabric. Even if they move subtly, FE wakes up with an ache. The INTP will also care, but T leads with accuracy and NE with possibilities. Their first impulse is to correct the claim, not to hold the relational container. If it turns into a debate about terms, they're energized. If it becomes a delicate empathy dance, they may feel like they're walking in a museum full of tripwires. Let's talk focus. INFJ 5w4 has a gravitational pull toward the one big through line. NE gathers scattered stars and draws a constellation that feels inevitable. The question underneath is, what story is this situation trying to tell, and where does it go if no one intervenes? INTP runs their life like an open-source repo. T builds a core logic, NE branches ideas and accepts forks. The question underneath is, What is the simplest accurate model that survives pressure from unpredictable inputs? Both are brilliant. One assumes coherence can be perceived and stewarded. The other assumes models must remain porous and updatable. When INFJ 5w4s are quiet, it's often because the whole room is in their head. They're running simulations of people's motives, limits, wounds, and unspoken agreements. Their quiet carries the weight of meaning. When INTPs are quiet, it's usually because the problem is more interesting than the noise. Their quiet carries the hum of tinkering. Ask an INFJ 5w4 what they were thinking and they'll tell you a human story with symbolic architecture. Ask an INTP and you'll get a schematic with variable names. You can also feel the difference in how they edit themselves. INFJ 5w4 edits for resonance. They're hunting the sentence that lands in the listener's chest with dignified clarity. They're allergic to manipulation but obsessed with delivery as an ethical act. INTP edits for precision. They'll cut or add to reduce ambiguity and minimize category errors. They're allergic to sloppy claims and prefer to let the chips fall where they may, socially speaking. Under stress, INFJ 5w4 can become icy oracular. Need tightens around a single ominous forecast, and Faye becomes surgical. This must happen, and here's how I'll manage the human consequences. It can look like a philosopher king in exile, detached, decisive, and oddly compassionate at a distance. INTP under stress can oscillate between rabbit-holing and blunt detachment. They might compulsively refine a model while ignoring the emotional temperature, or they might cut through complexity with abrupt verdicts that sound harsher than intended. Neither is unkind at the core. Both are trying to regain a sense of control in their native languages. Let's enter daily life. In texting, INFJ 5w4 will send short, courteous check-ins followed by occasional monologues that read like letters. They curate emotional tone, even with few words. INTP will leave messages unread until they have a coherent reply, then hit you with a concise block of highly dense logic or a chaotic spray of ideas and links. In friendships, INFJ 5w4 often develops a small circle of mission-linked bonds, people united by meaning. INTP will collect a constellation of skill-linked or idea-linked contacts they can ping when a thread heats up, with little obligation beyond intellectual camaraderie. Creativity looks different too. INFJ 5w4 often produces thematic bodies of work, series that evolve a thesis about the soul, society, or a moral paradox. They like projects that change people or reveal a hidden justice. INTP produces tools, frameworks, systems, and thought experiments. They like projects that change how we think and make future thinking easier. Give both the same brief, make a video about loneliness. The INFJ 5w4 will stage a narrative with archetypes and a soft call to reach out. The INTP will map causal mechanisms, urban design, technology, attention economics, and propose a modular antidote. Decision-making is another giveaway. INFJ 5w4 asks, what does this mean long-term for the people involved? Their pros and cons list is loaded with relational and moral considerations, often invisible to outsiders. INTP asks, what is the cleanest logic consistent with reality as I currently understand it? Their pros and cons list is loaded with variables and failure modes, often invisible to people who only read emotional signals. Put an INFJ 5w4 and an INTP on the same startup team and you'll get a visionary mission statement and an elegant back-end architecture. But you'll also need a translator so they don't assume the other is ignoring what matters. Here's a counterintuitive pitfall that fuels mistype. INFJ 5w4s can look hyper-analytical because they're defending meaning with precision tools. They'll study systems, read white papers, and sound like a lab coat to prevent human harm. INTPs can look soulful because they recognize beauty in logic, appreciate unusual art, and dislike inauthenticity. If you judge by clothing, musical taste, or book lists, you'll confuse them. Judge by the prime directive: does the mind serve meaning in people, or do meaning and people serve the mind's model? Let's run 3 scenarios to make this concrete. Scenario 1. A friend asks, "Should I leave my job?" The INFJ 5w4 listens for long-term story arcs, values, dignity, hidden costs, and gently reflects the moral contour. Your spirit has been paying interest on a loan that will never mature. They'll then offer a transitional plan that protects relationships. The INTP maps constraints, pay, skill growth, market options, manager profile, and designs an optimal path with contingencies. Here are 3 pivots, expected timelines, and what to prototype this week. Both care, both help. One shepherds a soul, the other optimizes a system. Scenario 2. A debate escalates online. The INFJ 5w4 notices shame dynamics and the impact of tone. They'll reframe, soften edges, and aim for a restorative landing. We're close to the same concern. Let's define harm carefully and preserve goodwill. The INTP notices false dichotomies and category errors. They'll tighten definitions and push for intellectual hygiene. Your claim presupposes X and smuggles in Y. If we decompose it, the disagreement dissolves. One moderates the room, the other sterilizes the argument. Scenario 3. Romance. INFJ 5w4 courts like a slow sonnet. They reveal inner landscapes in layers, test for shared purpose, and pay reverent attention to subtext. They often gift experiences that symbolize commitment. INTP courts like a private lab tour. They reveal their mind's hidden corridors, test for conversational play, and pay reverent attention to intellectual honesty. They often gift tools, books, or clever solutions to your daily friction. If you recall feeling understood in my essence, you probably dated an INFJ 5w4. If you recall feeling free to be a full-on nerd without judgment, you probably dated an INTP. Let's talk errors in self-typing. INFJ 5w4s often mistype as INTP because they were once punished for being too much, so they learned to present insight in sterile packaging. They'll call themselves logical because their empathy is strategic and understated, but their life is organized around protecting the vulnerable and redeeming meaning. INTPs often mistype as INFJ because they dislike superficiality and small talk, prize authenticity, and have a surprising, private tenderness. They'll call themselves empathetic because they refuse to manipulate, but their native steering wheel is still analysis, not social attunement. Body language gives clues if you look calmly. INFJ 5w4 eye contact tends to be warm, scanning for micro-reactions, then softening when emotions rise. INTP eye contact tends to be intermittent, intensifies when they're drilling a point, then breaks to chase a thought. INFJ posture mirrors to signal safety. INTP posture freezes when thoughts spool up. Again, not proof, just texture. Now, how do each recharge? Both need solitude, but solitude means different things. INFJ 5w4 solitude is sanctuary, curated light, meaningful music, the specific book that aligns with today's inner weather. They're regulating emotional coherence and renewing devotion to a purpose. INTP solitude is a playground, tabs, notebooks, code, models. They're stress testing a thought and chasing elegant angles until the mind purrs. Invite an INFJ 5w4 to a silent retreat, and they'll consider it a sacrament. Invite an INTP, and they'll bring graph paper. If you must choose between them quickly, use the broken promise versus broken premise test. Which hurts you more? The INFJ 5w4 feels cut by broken promises, violations of implicit or explicit relational contracts. Trust fractures the soul narrative, it's not just business. The INTP feels cut by broken premises, violations of logic, double standards, category errors. Truth fractures the system, it's not just semantics. One bleeds in the mythic realm of loyalty, the other in the structural realm of coherence. Career-wise, you'll find INFJ 5w4s quietly steering missions. Therapists who specialize in hard cases, designers who insist on human dignity in UX, writers who smuggle healing into culture, strategists who protect the public from the unintended side effects of clever inventions. You'll find INTPs building elegant architectures, researchers simplifying gnarly problems, engineers crafting tools that scale, analysts who hunt edge cases, philosophers who make ideas less wrong. Both can thrive anywhere as long as they're allowed to think deeply without performative noise. Let's clean up a few persistent myths. Myth 1. INFJs are feelers so they're not technical. False. INFJ 5w4s can be devastatingly technical when technique protects meaning. They'll learn the language of the lab to advocate from inside the citadel. Myth 2. INTPs don't care about people. False. INTPs care deeply about fairness, autonomy, and the right not to be coerced by sloppy thinking. Their compassion often looks like giving you better tools rather than hugging you through the storm. Myth 3. If I cry at movies, I must be INFJ. Crying is not a type. The reason you cry and what you do next matters more. If you're still on the fence, run this final introspective drill. Think of your proudest work. Ask, was I trying to heal a fracture in the human story, or was I trying to reduce error in a model? What felt sacred, the dignity of people or the integrity of thought? Then ask what failure haunts you more, losing a person because you couldn't bridge a meaning gap, or shipping something flawed because you didn't foresee a corner case. The ache will tell on you. For INFJ 5w4s watching, your growth edge is to let your models be challenged earlier. Invite friendly INTPs to break your synthesis before you stake your soul on it. Practice naming your needs out loud so fate doesn't martyr itself in noble silence. For INTPs watching, your growth edge is to feel the room before you fix the premise. Practice translating, "you're wrong," into, "can we explore a different assumption?" Learn to signal warmth on purpose. Not to manipulate, but to keep doors open so your best ideas can be heard. And if you're in a relationship across this divide, there's magic here. The INFJ 5w4 gifts direction, meaning, and a rare kind of loyalty that sees your essence and protects it. The INTP gifts clarity, freedom, and a rare kind of honesty that refuses to control you by emotional leverage. Together, you can build structures that are both true and good. You just need a shared ritual. The INFJ names the human impact of a decision. The INTP names the logical scaffolding that can sustain it. No one gets to be the sole owner of truth. Before we close, a word about aesthetics. The reason so many INFJ 5w4s and INTPs wear the same black sweater and annotate the same dense books is not a cosmic joke. It's that both value depth over glitter. Both resent being reduced to a caricature. Both would rather be silently competent than loudly impressive. So the mistype thrives in a culture obsessed with surface. The fix is not louder labels, it's quieter attention. So, INFJ 5w4 versus INTP. Two quiet powerhouses. One bends time into meaning and tends the human flame. The other carves noise into elegant structure and defends the mind's freedom. If you've been misnamed, let this be your permission slip to step into the engine that's actually under your hood. And if you recognize someone you love in the other profile, you've just been handed a translation manual. If this helped you unmask a mistype, here's your next move. Rewatch and pause at the scenarios. Ask yourself and your closest people which descriptions ring truest. Then drop a comment with a line that hit you in the gut, broken promise, or broken premise. I read them all. And if you want a deeper dive into function stacks, Enneagram overlays, and real-life case studies, tell me which pairing you want next. Until then, honor your engine. Build from it. Live from it. And let the world see the quiet power you've been carrying all along.